with our roll call. Dennis Gilkey. Here. Cullum Hasty. Here. David Gallagher. Here. Fred Forbes. Here. Nicole Johnson. Here. Tori Polonitsa. Here. All right, we will go to public comment on our agenda items. Anyone from the public who would like to speak, please come up to the microphone here and state your name for the record. And you'll have 3 minutes, and John is the official timer.
Hi, Donna Stone. I'm on the External Affairs Committee over at Worthington Country Club. As a public member, I would appreciate it if we can get a little bit more information at all meetings other than just the agenda. A lot of us cannot access the city website or download information off the city website. For example, tomorrow's city council meeting, there are no packets available for the public. And, you know, you really have to be a little bit more cognizant of, you know, keeping the public informed, other than just assuming that they can get things off of the website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Christine Ross here on behalf of the Bonita Springs Area Chamber of Commerce and the Bonita Springs Estero Economic Development Council. I would like to ask that the Water Task Force reference the Baracco study when you have questions about issues on this land, because the city has paid hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to have that work done, and it's a compilation of all the previously done studies. Secondly, we have a really big issue with the fact that the proposal that was, or scope of work that was drafted by Kevin Irwin was dated January 10th, prior to even the first meeting of the Water Task Force. So we're not sure how on earth he could have known what the task force might have wanted to know if he in fact did it prior to them even having a meeting. And so we will be at the meeting tomorrow night, or tomorrow morning, the city council meeting, to ask them to follow staff's recommendations and that everything that this task force does be done with proper procedure as is indicated by this attorney and regular city protocols. Thank you.
Seeing no one else jumping to come up, we will go to item 3, which is approval of the minutes from February 3rd. Yeah. Go ahead.
On page 2, I wasn't sure, I don't really recall what this was, on the third paragraph down where it says Mr. Flood replied it's $8 million construction costs. I'm not sure if that was for a specific item or timeline or what that was, and when I saw that I said I don't remember what that $8 million was for, so maybe we could clarify that. You can wait and do it some other time. Do you remember? Oh, okay, good.
It was the $8 million to actually do the physical taking of roads out.
Oh, okay, so that's the work that was out, okay, okay. Can we clarify that? It was for the work in the east of the DRGR, Bonita, okay.
I think Karen just got that message.
Okay. And then also, there was on page 4, I told Fred Parton, it says that he's not a genealogist, and I think that's true, but I think I think that should be hydrogeologist probably on page 4 up there. And then let's see here, down there on the committee member, Forbes made a motion. It says Roger Irwin instead of Kevin Irwin. So, and then also on the paragraph where it talks about committee member Gilkey, program for resource efficiency communities. That's actually resource efficient communities. Resource efficient communities. So it's just a program that UF has.
Anyone else have comments on that?
Yeah, I've been under the weather, and I have not had a chance to read these minutes. I'm happy to approve them, but I'd like, with the contingency that if I come up with things that I'm particularly interested in, questions I ask South Florida Water Management in particular, I want to make sure that all that's in there. So I would like to reserve the right to come back at the next meeting and say, well, I've found these either omissions or little discrepancies, because I have not seen them or not read them.
I don't know how that, and I don't have, I don't know how you can make that. I mean, if you have questions with them, you know, we can certainly call Phil or Dan or whatever.
I'm saying I want to make sure that the minutes reflect accurately what they said.
But we have it recorded. It's recorded and televised, so everything that we say, do, move, if I wave my hand, it's recorded.
Yeah, but if the minutes don't portray what.
If we could have this on the mics, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If the minutes don't accurately portray what Dan Walter said in reply to some questions, all I want to do is have the opportunity to fix the written record, because the people will tend to look at that before they go to the minute.
Are you
That should be a-
suggesting that we have a stenographer in here? Because we're recording it.
I'm suggesting that there's things that were said. For example, I asked a question, does other counties and municipalities within South Florida Water Management District, do they have locally adopted regulations above and beyond what South Florida Water Management has for stormwater design as well as pollution control? The answer was yes, and he gave the example of Collier County. I just want to make sure that things that are important like that to the public is in these minutes, that's all, and that's all I've said.
Yeah, like I say, it's being recorded and filmed as we sit here.
I understand that, but this is the written record. It's like city council, they have, their stuff is recorded too, but they're very particular about, and I'm not saying it's not in there, I just said, because I was ill, I haven't had a chance to look at it, that's all.
You can hand John the microphone.
I believe that the practice that our city attorney has indicated would be most practical is that if a question ever comes up about what actually was said during a meeting, that yes, the written minutes might be the first thing that someone go to, but what is more practical is to go to the audio recordings or the video so that you can see the actual context of the give and take of the particular discussion.
The only thing I would say is that the things I'm concerned about are just like Dennis, rightfully so, has read the minutes and found some discrepancies. All I want to do is make sure that if I find some like that, they'll be important. They won't be some little trivial thing. So that's all I'm saying. Thank you.
So did that include a motion to minutes?
Defer 'em if you want.
Yeah, I would prefer to defer it to the next meeting, but if that's not convenient, you don't want to do it.
No, you can do it, that's fine by me.
Okay. Well, then, I would like to propose that we defer it till the next meeting, and I apologize for being ill. I wish to hell I wasn't, really.
And a second from Cullum. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. John?
We've got two mics down there.
I know, but I got chastised for taking it out.
You did. I asked the chair if I could just make a comment, brief comment or two before we got into the presentation from Fred from BSU. A couple of things, and this is more just procedural, and I want to throw it out as a suggestion. We had talked at prior meetings about my attempts to get the packets out 1 week prior to the next meeting. That was just a suggestion. I thought it was one that was acceptable to the group, but if that proves to be not workable, obviously staff is at your disposal. Tell us what you would like us to do. The problem that I'm having, frankly, is that when I got this packet out, for example, 1 week prior, I had multiple correspondence with many members where additional information was provided, along with suggestions that we do addendums to the packet. My problem is that I got additional items that would have been addendums to the packet up until Sunday night. So, again, I will do it any way you want to do, but unless I hear otherwise, we're going to try to get the packets out 1 week prior so everybody has an opportunity to look at the information and digest it. If you don't get a packet 1 week prior, please let us know, because there's been some indication that some folks had not getting their packets. I can't fix that if I don't know it. So again, the game plan, unless I hear otherwise, is to get the packets to you 1 week before. If you don't get it 1 week before, for example, the next meeting is March the 3rd, a Monday, you should get it the Monday prior to that. It might come Tuesday morning as opposed to Monday, but generally speaking, you should get it 1 week prior. If you don't get it, let me know. If you can, make every attempt to get me your packet information so it can go out in that packet. Today, for example, you all received on your desk about 6 different things that came in after, and I've made copies for the public back there. It's not the most efficient way, obviously, for people to do their work. So we'll do it any way you want, but unless I hear otherwise, that's going to be the game plan. Second, very briefly, again, this is just procedural. There has been discussion about the room setup, the use of the handheld microphones. I had thought that there was a consensus that the group was comfortable with that because it does 2 things, obviously. It helps people that are watching on television to figure out who's speaking. We don't have a cameraman going from person to person, so if the mic is held in somebody's hands, if Cullum's holding it, people know who's speaking. It helps in that sense. It also helps the chair in the sense that he gets to ensure that there aren't multiple conversations going over each other. If you want to do it a different way, we can try to do it a different way, but unless I hear otherwise, that's kind of the game plan as it stands now. So again, if you're comfortable with this, wonderful. If you're not, let me know. But until we hear otherwise, I guess those are going to be kind of the rules that we try to play by.
Question, is there any possibility, the setup's fine, but is there any way we could get even 2 more microphones? Because a lot of the time is spent passing the microphone around.
I can see what we have.
Is that it, John?
That's it.
Okay, we will go to item number 4, which is our presentation by Bonita Springs Utilities. Mr. Parton?
Yes, I have Vanna to assist me in my presentation. Thank you for this opportunity to come before this committee. I'm Fred Parton, Executive Director of Bonita Springs Utilities. I've been asked to come before you to talk a little bit about our resources, what we have, and kind of what we expect in the future in the area. So I'll try to cover it as best I can. For actually more detailed information, hydrology, things like that, we certainly have resources and experts that work for us that we'd be happy to call upon, if necessary, at a future date for this group. We're very fortunate in Bonita Springs compared to many parts of the country and the world in as much as our water resources. We're surrounded by water. To the west, we have the Gulf of Mexico. To the east, we have the Everglades. Yes, sir.
Dave, would you mind come over here so you can see the boards? That's kind of sit around. Just so you can see when they start doing the presentation.
Right. That's all right.
It's hard to get your back right next to
Certainly.
see the stuff. Just grab one, yeah, just get one of those, David, it'll be fine. Here. Gotcha.
We live in an area that we do have an abundant water supply. Again, the Gulf of Mexico to the west. We have the Everglades to the east. And we're very fortunate. We have good groundwater quality, water at our disposal that we've taken advantage of. We have seasonal climates. The wintertime, it's pretty mild. Everybody likes to come down from up north and enjoy our winters. During the summertime, it gets wet. Some winters are drier than others, and some summers are wetter than others. That's welcome to Florida. You're always going to have that. And sometimes when you have several times the normal amount of rainfall, you're going to experience things like flooding in some areas. One of the reasons Bonita Springs water system began back in 1970, it actually was formed by a committee of the Chamber of Commerce. And it's because we lived in a coastal community. Along the beach, they were exposed to high chloride concentration, salt water in their wells, which is undesirable. Inland, you dealt with two water quality concerns. One, hydrogen sulfide, that's the rotten egg smell that you would incur in some of your wells. And also iron was the other problem. They formed a committee, and that was in 1970-71. They received funding from the Farmers Home Administration, which gave them the initial money. They had to get so many people to sign up to agree to use the water service. It became available, and they did that. We became Bonita Springs Water System. It's a cooperative utility, member-owned, not-for-profit. The members, the users of the utility, elect the board of directors. On the water system side, currently we have a 15.5 million gallon per day plant capacity. That consists of a 9 million gallon per day lime softening plant and a 6.5 million gallon per day reverse osmosis plant. As you can see on the chart with the average daily flows, we're currently experiencing 8.07 million gallons per day. And that shows you the average daily flow history over the past 10 years. You can see how it was quite a bit higher back in 04 through 06, and it declined and started to pick back up in the last couple of years. The peak day in 2013 was 10.8 million gallons. You can see the increase. Yes, sir.
Question, please. What caused the drop from the 9.5 down to the 7?
That occurred.
Population income or summer visitors or something like that?
Well, the main thing, that was the beginning of the downturn in the economy. So you could attribute it to empty rooftops. You could attribute it to slowdown in construction activities, which construction on its own increases water consumption throughout the system. Through that period prior to that, we were installing 125 to 150 new water meters each and every month. And that was part of the incline. That was through the boom period. And of course, it declined after that. You also have to take into account some of the variables, such as the season. Some years are wetter than other years. Some years are drier. The drier years will have higher consumption. So it's a combination of all those factors that play a role in that number. But I think the biggest thing was the economy and the downturn.
What's an empty rooftop?
Where you would have a vacant house.
Okay.
It was
Thanks.
once occupied, all of a sudden there's nobody there.
Okay.
And I think every community experienced some of that to a degree in Southwest Florida. The other chart, number of water customers, illustrates the customer count from 2004 to 2013. In 2013, we were nearly 42,000 water customers in our service territory. One of the questions that you have is, well, how much, with our current capacity, how much can we serve now and in the future? And as a planning tool, I use the number 250 gallons per day per unit. That can vary. It can go from 225 up to 250. Again, it can change from community to community, but I think that's a relatively good conservative number to use on that basis. So with the current capacity of our water treatment plants, we could serve 62,000 units today.
Was that per person or was that per house?
Per unit, because per unit could be commercial, it could be residential, it could be all the above, and a combination thereof. Right now, we're serving with the current capacity, 62,000. Yeah. So basically, with our current water customer count, we have room for additional 20,000 units in the community. Now,
You got room for another 20,000?
yes, with current capacity. But what you have to take into account when you're, that's a number. But for purposes of planning, it takes you 3 to 4 years to anticipate a project. So by the time you determine there's going to be a need in 4 or 5 years, you have to design it, you have to finance it, then you have to construct it. So you're looking at a window of 4 years to do it. under a best-case scenario. And I would like to mention that in 2014, we do have budgeted for water and wastewater an updated master plan. And that's important because our last master plan was really right before the boom period, and things have changed since then, and we need to step back and look at the area and look at what we have. Yes, ma'am.
Citywide, or I guess your service area-wide, how many units are currently on the books but not yet constructed?
Well, I don't count them until they've paid their impact fees, and that check is in the mail. So this 41,900 units represents all those that I'll serve them today, tomorrow, and in the future. If they're not a member, if they're not hooked up, then they're at risk. Now, one time when growth was so high, a developer would have to anticipate the capacity requirements of the utility and recognize how quickly we could add capacity. If they wanted to guarantee all the units that they were planning to construct would have water and sewer service, they would have to enter into a developer's agreement. Right now, that's not such a big issue for them because we have adequate capacity. But, you know, in the future, it will once again become an issue.
Fred, real simple. The numbers of units and all that you're quoting, that's within the whole service area.
That is correct.
Yeah, so
Both
that's-
within the city and in
So
the
that's-
unincorporated areas
Yeah.
of Bonita Springs Utility Service Territory. And we go north to Williams Road. So everything Williams Road south is in our territory.
The question I had to do with capacity. Are we nearing a point where the amount of water coming in, flowing downstream when the aquifers are equally or exceeding our usage?
Say that one more time. The
What's
twist
the
you put in
input
there.
versus output? We got all the aquifers, we've got feeding down there,
Well-
you're feeding the wells. At what point in time is it's used?
I think I'll be covering that in my subsequent presentation, so I'll cover that
Okay,
in
thank
just a
you.
second. And if I don't cover it adequately, then let me know. So anyway, as I mentioned, we do have a master plan budgeted for this year, and we're glad to get that rolling so that we can update our records and plan for the future. The next graph is the geography of or geology of the area, showing the aquifer systems. In the Tamiami, that is it's called a superficial aquifer system, and there's a separation from the surface water by the clay layer. It varies in thickness, anywhere from 30 feet thick to 50 feet thick, and you know it varies in the different areas. I'm not prepared to go into the exact formation of it, and I think a hydrogeologist would be the appropriate one to address that at the appropriate time. But currently we have 19 wells pumping from that aquifer system. We had a total at one time, there were 24 wells, but 5 wells we had plugged and abandoned due to low production and trying to separate them from each other a little bit more if there were some drawdown concerns at some point.
That's 19 in the Tamiami?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
11 wells are located in what we call the western well field. You know where the water plant falls there at I-75 and East Terry Street. The utility back in the early 70s purchased a strip of land 3 miles long, and they placed the wells in the Tamiami Aquifer at 1,000-foot increments through there. They didn't take up the entire area originally. They basically covered 2 miles of it, and now currently we have a couple miles going into the third mile. So there's 11 wells in the western well field. We recognize the limitation of the Tamiami in the coastal area, and I got to add that every coastal community takes advantage of that, what I call cheap, easy water. It's not uncommon, but you have to recognize the limitations to that. It's not a problem in the summertime. You could pump it all day long and not have any problems, but in the wintertime when you need the water because the demands are higher, that's when you don't have as much rainfall and water retention in the area. So then you would actually, if you overdraw it, then you can pull the salt water inland, and it will increase your chloride content in those wells, and you could experience problems. So we developed a well field 2 miles east several years ago and added 8 additional wells. Out of normal operating procedure, we rely primarily on the eastern well field during the winter time, so as it removes us further from the western well field. We still use the western to some extent, but not as much. Yes?
Is that the one on Perry Street, East Perry Street?
Right. Off Bonita Grand, or east of Bonita Grand.
Where did you say then there's 8 there then? You had 11 west and 8 east?
Yes, there's 8 wells in the eastern well field. The other map that Vanna put up, it shows the well field protection area, and that's just a map. I'm not going to go into details as far as the drawdowns and the various contaminants, but this basically, I'm going to say it was in the late 80s or early 90s that Lee County had adopted the well field protection ordinance for the entire area. They recognize that you really, in your drinking water supplies, you don't want to have uses that potentially could contaminate your water supply. And so they developed the criteria, and basically takes into account the travel time for the various contaminants from the well. There would be a big difference between the Tamiami aquifer and, say, the Floridian aquifer, just because of the depth and concern. So that's just to illustrate there are well field protection ordinances. Bonita Springs did adopt that ordinance at some point. I'm not quite sure what the current status is, but it's probably time for it to be updated here in the foreseeable future. The along that western well field, when we went to reverse osmosis, probably like 8 years ago, we developed wells in the upper Floridian aquifer system, and those wells are 850 to 1,120 feet deep. Mary, would you put back up the one showing the aquifer system? And you can see the one that is the Floridian in the kind of the pink area. And so that's getting quite a bit deeper. The nice thing about that aquifer system is it's recharged from a much greater area. I've heard some hydrogeologists refer to, you know, being recharged from Georgia. Well, I don't know that it's recharged from quite that large of an area, but it is quite a big area because of its depth. Its water quality is not as good as that surficial or the Tamiami aquifer system because it's high in chlorides and other minerals. Yes, Dennis?
Could you clarify the chlorides of the lower Tamiami and the Hawthorne, just for relative purposes? And then, since you're talking desal, the Hawthorne, lower Hawthorne, related to, say, seawater, if you would, just so we get a relativity.
Would be
there.
happy to. Your Tamiami chloride content will run anywhere from about 80 parts per million up to 100, 110, just depending on where you are. That's very good raw water quality for chloride content. And to give you kind of something to relate to, irrigation is often the barometer for your chlorides and what's permissible in your community. Most salts, most plants and grasses can take salt up to about 700 parts per million. When you get above that, then you start seeing impacts upon the different grasses and especially citrus. Now you'll find out on the beach area, you'll find Floritam and St. Augustine in that area primarily because they're somewhat salt resistant, much more than the Bahia grasses. And so your Floridian aquifer will have a salt content of, 2,000 to 3,000 parts per million, roughly. Now, if you want to compare that to salt water, that's going to be 20,000 or above. Now, the direct correlation in reverse osmosis, which is membrane technology, which is almost the same between the Floridian and desalinization, is in energy costs. It costs you a lot more money or a lot more power to treat the salt water versus the Floridian. and it's just energy intense, quite frankly. So that's the biggest difference. It can be done. One of the disadvantages is the byproduct is what you call brine. 20–30% of that water is rejected and placed into a deep well, thousands of feet deep, as a disposal. So you really don't want to do that if you don't have to. If it's your only option, then it works and can be done.
Fred, doesn't up around Tampa, don't they have one of those straight Gulf water to potable water conversion plants?
You know,
I was told they.
I'm not aware of desalinization up there. They could have. I know that they do have it down in the Keys.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple small systems around. But you would only do that if you really didn't have any other options. And again, it gets back to cost. If you're in Saudi Arabia, that's cheap. Exactly. So there was reference at one point where I heard something about using surface water for potable water supply. And when I hear that, I think of Lake Okeechobee and some of the things that they're experiencing in recent years. Actually, it's been going on forever, the problems over there. And if you're pulling off of a surface water supply, it really varies, not only in quality, but in quantity. It's seasonal. You know, in the dry season, that surface water is not going to be as abundant as it was previously. And I see a bigger problem is susceptibility to contamination. And if you had no other option, some places in the United States use surface water and do it quite successfully. But it's something that, you know, we really don't need to be doing in this area. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about our wastewater system. And again, I attribute, in 1991, Bonita Springs Utilities went into the wastewater business. And the main thing, our goal, was to improve the water resources in the Imperial River, the Estero Bay, eliminate the impacts of package plants and septic tanks. I would say, bar none, that has been the best thing that ever happened to the community and to our water resources, was the movement of Bonita Springs Utilities into the wastewater business. Well, no, Paul, you're right. You're a close second, being mayor. We have 2 water reclamation facilities, 11 million gallons per day total capacity, 7 million gallons in the west plant, which is the one up near Strike Lane, and 4 million gallons per day in the east plant, which is the one that you see from I-75. The average daily flow for 2013 was a little over 4 million gallons per day, and we experienced peak flow of 6.4 in 2013. We currently serve 39,180 households and businesses in the area. 39,180. Considering that we did not have centralized sewers in the Bonita Springs area, and we've been able to observe what's happened in other communities trying to embark on a monumental task like this, I'm very proud of our community and taking on this challenge.
Fred, on that number of customers, there's actually more than that because of the single meter on like a condo building, right? Am I right?
No, these are units.
These are
Yeah.
actually, even if there's 50 units on a master meter, you're counting all 50.
Yes, I'd count all 50. Now, if I were giving you a meter count, or, you know, then that 50 units would only count as one.
And if the school, I know, the Lee County Department of Education, I guess, they own property out there. The Lee County School System owns property in the DRGR.
Okay.
So you've got like Spring Creek Elementary, you service all those. Are those multiple metered? And for the kids? I mean,
Well,
how, do you,
The school would be like a commercial, and the number of units attributed to that would be based upon meter size.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you how many.
no, but you count them as more than one?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, we count all of them in this. So I'm very proud of the accomplishments of the utility. We've eliminated nearly 5,000 septic tanks that impact our rivers and bay. We've developed alternative water supply utilizing the deeper aquifer system, adding a second well field further to the east. Phil Flood referenced that we were 99% reuse water. Well, I'm saying we're 100% reuse water, and I think that 1% may be internal use there at the facilities themselves. At our wastewater facilities, from the solids that historically was dumped in pastures, we convert to pellets, and that is sold for fertilizer. We've received several awards for our drinking water, as well as the operations of our water and distribution systems in this area. Now to talk a little bit about the DRGR area. From the Baraka report, they referenced 1,996 units existing in that area. I took a look at that and would like to just make the following comments. In Citrus Park, 1,536 units are on their water system and wastewater system.
This is on theirs.
Yes, this is Citrus Park. For the Bella Villa area, which is part of a Citrus Park, they have 99 units on the Citrus water system, but those 99 units are served by septic tanks. In the BSU area, Sun Village Estates has 78 units on water, and those 78 units are served by septic tanks. Morton Grove, 206 units, both water and wastewater by Bonita Springs Utilities. And what they've termed as other areas, there were 77 units that had wells and septic tanks in that area. With the current densities allowed for that area, for future, Baraka mentioned there were 752 more units allowed in that area. And to my knowledge, all those would be well and septic tank. Well, that completes my presentation, and again, I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Well, that was my question about a school. What, if we don't have the BSU out there and we're doing septics for those additional 752, and the school then puts in another 2,000 kids, how does that happen? Do they especially hook up to you, or?
One of two things will happen. When you develop a parcel, number one, Bonita Springs Utilities is not going to start expanding services into undeveloped areas. We never have, we never will. It's the developer's responsibility. That's quite frankly how Cape Coral got in such a bind, is because they basically became the developer. They platted all these lots and then walked away from it, and the city had to provide the roads, the drainage, the water, the sewer, the irrigation, all those services. We're not going to do that, so those areas have to be self-sufficient. Now, the school, if they can justify spending the money to extend water and sewer to that site, then they can do that. If they don't do that, then they're looking at wells and probably a package plant, given the size of the school, versus a septic tank.
How do you do your long-term planning, kind of build-out planning? Is it that you ideally feel that at X number of customers, that is the cap, and therefore work with the city to say this is our maximum? Are you in more of reaction mode of whatever the city is going to allow for densities or hookups, you react and serve to incorporate that capacity? How, for your ultimate build out, what are your plans on that?
Well, we do it by planning and recognizing what's occurred and what we reasonably anticipate occurring. We've been waiting 14 years for the city to tell us what's going to happen in the DRGR area. Quite frankly, it's an area that is not pristine wetlands. It's area, could you set up the aerial photograph? I think it's the very back one. The other one. That was close to the back, the other back one. You can just observe by looking at the aerial photograph the difference in the DRGR area of Bonita Springs versus the real wetlands to the east, and there's a significant difference. We have master plans that were developed in the past. As I mentioned earlier, we have a plan for this year to update our master plan, but that piece of that puzzle is still going to remain unknown until something is done or not done. So for planning purposes, we probably will not add it in there until something is done, whether it's now or 10 years down the road. As far as, is there a limit to what service we can provide and the size? Well, I think we have many options available to us to accommodate build out of this entire area, and I really don't anticipate a problem on the wastewater side nor the potable water side if it's done properly. Again, I think improvements in that area will not only enhance the infrastructure, the water, sewer, roads, drainage, but it's going to provide economic benefits as well as environmental benefits. We're no longer going to have the water hitting the area, the dirt roads, washing directly into the Imperial River. And that's something that we really need to take advantage. This is an opportunity for this community to do it right. Yes, sir.
Three unrelated questions. One, can we get a copy of your presentation?
I would make that available to you,
Okay,
yes.
thank you. Number one. Number two, in the BSU property, are there any areas that are diked, mounded so that the water that is in the surrounding areas doesn't flow into it?
Well, our road is a dike. I-75 is a dike.
Well, yeah, I'm talking about.
US 41's a dike.
I'm talking about mounds or dikes like a lot of the farmers, the mining company.
Yeah, I'm sure somewhere on that property, we have 457 contiguous acres east of I-75 where that plant site is.
Okay.
And I'm sure somewhere in there, the farmer at one point in time diverted water to another area of the property.
Isn't there a little dike around that, one of the big ponds out there that you guys have?
Are you referring
Well,
to?
when you and I made that
where I showed you the illustration of
yeah.
improvement?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me add this before I cover that specifically.
Yeah.
You've had three major projects on the DRGR that has had a net benefit
Right.
to the DRGR.
Right,
The YMCA,
right.
the fire station on Bonita Grand, Bonita Springs Utilities East Plant.
Okay.
What they've been able to do on those sites are provide the roads, the drainage, the water retention, which basically takes all the water that comes down on that area, puts it into an area, and allows it to percolate and cleanse itself over time. We're currently in 99% of that area. You don't have that benefit. Once the area is saturated, when the water comes down, it hits it and hits the nearest canal directly to the Imperial River.
Well,
And that's what we need to fix.
Last question. Are you all working with South Florida Water? There's some kind of a big aquifer study that is bigger than this area that South Florida Water Management is involved in, and it won't even be done for 2 years. Have they even talked to you?
I don't know of a point in time in the past 32 years that there has not been a study
Yeah.
ongoing, and we work with them at every opportunity. I have a lot of respect for the folks in South Florida Water Management District and their task and goal, and we have followed their advice in many areas. In fact, we're quite often referenced as the utility to follow in water resource issues.
Thank you for agreeing to provide a copy of your report. I'm finding it very illuminating and useful.
Good.
Secondly, could you be so kind to step up to the map and sort of point out what you're telling us? Rather than just seeing a bunch of yellow lines.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm assuming you're providing us a copy of the map, too.
I'll actually leave this with you. This is a map that was actually supplied by South Florida Water Management District. I had a copy made of it because I thought it was a pretty good map. What I mentioned before, if you look at the current DRGR area, roughly this area through here, This is Lake Trafford. These are wetlands. You can see how, this is the pristine wetlands coming down. This does not resemble this in any way, shape, or form. The outline, the yellow outline, illustrates the Crew properties. Is that about right, Brenda? And Crew was set up to set aside lands for water retention, water resources, environmental, many great things. But once again, this has been farmed. It's been altered, and it will never be the pristine wetlands that we have out here. We have a lot of opportunities out here to retain more water. And I think Phil referred to that in some of the areas just north of Bonita Beach Road and some of their plans.
Okay, one other question. If you were, well, you know we're going to have something issued at the end of the game, what would BSU like to see us say? Is there some magic words or direction or that you would make your life more helpful or useful?
Well, if I can cut to the chase, we'd like for you to do it right. We've had more of the same for the past 20 plus years, ever since the DRGR was created. And it was not used properly originally. Everybody thought, well, it's going to change in the next planning cycle, and it never did. There are some lands out there. I'll stand tall on the wetlands, the true environmental wetlands, environmentally sensitive areas. But when it comes to these areas, it hasn't changed. It's not going to change unless you give property owners the ability to make those changes. You don't want to do it as a city. You know, you want the property owners to help with those changes. And right now, the city's going to be faced with a lot of the infrastructure requirements out there, the roads, the drainage, et cetera.
What would you like to receive from the task force? What would you like us to tell you to do?
Well, I don't know that you can tell us to do a whole lot of anything. However, I'd like for you to do the responsible thing and allow the property owners in there to make the improvements that really are needed in that area, and the water resources will benefit. And the property owners have to have a beneficial use. Now, you're getting my opinion now, not necessarily the views of my entire board of directors or the utility.
I have a question. The septics are a big deal to me out there. And I know that the sewer, in order to go to the YMCA, came to the corner of Terry and Bonita Grande. I live off of Bonita Grande, north of Terry Street. So I would like to know the procedure for myself, but also for my neighbors. Let's say the pit develops, and they want to bring sewer and water, and it kind of goes near my house. Then is it a city requirement, or what's the procedure of the individual people who own 5 and 10, acres out there to hook up, as it is?
Well, there's two different issues. One is on the water side. If you have water available, there are no state mandates requiring you to hook up to city water if it becomes available. There are mandates on the wastewater side. However, it's got to be feasible, meaning that because a force main runs beside your home or within a close proximity to your home, you are not required to hook up to a force main, because the lift station, you could spend $150,000 to $200,000 on a lift station by the time you install it with generators and telemetry and all that. So it just doesn't make sense in a lot of cases. And that's why we don't have 100% on sewers right now, because it didn't make sense.
So then it would be on the new construction versus the existing homes?
Yeah, you focus on the new construction. You definitely want the water and sewer infrastructure installed. Bonita Springs has done a great job, utilities have done a great job hooking up septic tanks where it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Where it just became outrageously expensive, we let those.
But it wouldn't be a situation necessarily of the city coming in or the BSU coming in and say, okay, now we've come into this area, so all you people who already live here have to cough up a couple $100,000.
Yeah, now if,
I just want to make sure.
well, let me say this. If we installed gravity down your street, we're going to tell you must hook up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we would do that. However, we're not going to, for a 5-acre tract, it'll never make financial sense to put in a gravity system.
Just not density there to make it happen. Fred, kind of on a different thing that you touched on earlier, but with your planning, you try to go out so many years and what have you, but there are specific requirements, if I remember from talking with Dr. Amata years ago, that like on the sewer side, I think when you get to 75% or 80% capacity, you have to have a plan in place for expansion, that sort. Can you kind of do that on the water and the sewers? Tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, you covered it. Once you reach 75% of your capacity, then you must begin the planning process. Again, it takes 4 years to turn that around, to do the design, financing, and then construction. So it's something you always have to watch what's occurred over the past year, look what your capacity is, see where you fall in those demands, and try to predict that. In fact, back in, I think it was 2008, we had designed and actually gone out to bids to do addition to our reverse osmosis plant because the growth had been so fast. We saw what had occurred the past year. We put the halt to it, and rightfully so. So, you know, we're geared up for the next expansion of the reverse osmosis, and we can be relatively quick on the wastewater.
Fred, on the capacity you have available, I guess first question is, both on water and sewer, is there sufficient capacity to serve the recommended densities that Rocco recommended, the medium densities, whatever? And then second question, I think on both of your plants you have, like on your wastewater out east was designed for, let me pick a number, 16 million. It was a big number, and you've got 4 million now. So what, it was master plan though for, what was that number, 12 or 16?
Yeah, we think we can put safely 16 million gallons per day on that facility. And at some point...
4 now.
Yeah, and you know, at some point in the future, the utility will likely shut down that west plant when it makes sense to do so, and then all the treatment will go to the east plant. You still have adequate lands out there, even if you need to expand it further than that you could do additional expansions.
And then how about the water? The same thing, that you've actually got room on your plants and your capacity?
Yes, and yeah, with reverse osmosis, that takes very little land area. Lime softening is land intense because you have the drying beds for your lime sludge and the plant area. At some day, I predict that the utility will shut down the lime softening component of it and go completely reverse osmosis. That's a natural thing. Cape Coral did it many years ago, and others have done the same thing.
Just in following along with that, I think maybe it was the district last time that talked about sort of the percentages of the Tamiami water source versus the Floridan, and it was at a 40-60 and then was going to reverse. Could you talk a little bit about that and when you think that number is going to shift and what the cost differentials would be?
And what the cost will be?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the 40-60 is based upon the capacity of the lime plant versus the capacity of the RO plant. The reality is our actual operations is opposite. We take 60% of the reverse osmosis water and blend 40% of the lime softening water. Why do we do that? Because it's better water. And we can tell the difference, so that's the way we operate the facility. What will the cost difference be? 20 years ago, I would say that it'd be substantial as you increase your reliance upon reverse osmosis. Today, not so much, because of technology, improvements in the membranes over the past 2 decades. It has improved quite a bit. They're not as power intense as they once were when membrane technology first came out. So it's become much more cost effective. Again, with the lime, I'm dealing with lime sludge. I have to haul it someplace, dump it, and you know, so there's pros and cons of both for sure, but I think reverse osmosis, the cost difference is not that great to prevent you from taking that step.
Out of curiosity, what the lime sludge that you, is there some recycled use for that?
really, we have not identified any beneficial use other than, put it in a landfill somewhere. Some areas add it with dirt and create road base. I've heard of that being done, but I can certainly see disadvantages of doing that. At one time, when we first bought the 417 acres, we were putting the lime on our property out at that, and we had a lot of people saying, it was contaminating everything and going to destroy the environment, et cetera. And today, you walk out and look at that area, but we put the lime down, we disc the area. You can't tell which area had the lime placed on it and which hasn't, because it's calcium carbonate and some of the other minerals and nutrients. There's nothing harmful with it.
Fred, I want to thank you for coming on such short notice, easy for me to say. Putting it together, it's been very, very informative, and I hope it's been a dress rehearsal for you for your upcoming annual meeting.
Thanks, Paul. And I expect you to be there, right?
And you can, they do update it once a year. They publish a book of fact of findings and tons of information from BSU for what they've done, what they plan to do, that you can always pick up, I guess, out at the office about any time. But they always have a new one every year at the annual meeting. And thank you and your board of directors for their guidance and leadership in the community, and your staff for the hard work.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for this opportunity.
Just one quick question. Could we get that map reduced to one of our packet size maps? And
Already made a note for myself,
Okay.
see if I can get it electronically.
That's part of the South Florida Water Management District's presentation, so it's already there.
All right. Item 5, discussion of possible next steps, including expectations, timing, et cetera. David.
Thank you, Paul. If I may, I had sat around after the last meeting trying to figure out where we are and where we're going, and I found it very confusing. So I sat down and built myself a roadmap where I think we're going and some of the steps we probably have to go through to get there. And if I could share it, I'd appreciate it.
And those are in the handouts that you got at the table.
It's called First Cut, The Road Ahead.
Maybe after he's done, what's in the packet is my work, so I'd like to go through that as well.
Yeah, basically I start out with a calendar, and every month I put in 2 meetings. And then I talked about the presentations we're going to have at each of these meetings, from Irwin, from Cobb, from Livingstone, from et cetera, taking up one of the meetings every month. And then at the end of the game, we're going to have probably 2, maybe 3 meetings to fine-tune what the hell it is we were coming up with and recommending, which will be exciting. And then I tried to come up with a list of topics that we're going to be looking at, whether the sewer systems, the mine, floodwaters, et cetera, and giving each one of them a 2-hour session to talk about. And you'd very soon come up with the fact that we don't have near enough time to do very much. And so what I'm trying to do and like to see us sort of evolve again, it's some specifics, like the second week in April, we're going to talk about X. The next week, we're going to talk about Y. The following week, we're going to have a different subject, so we have a blockage of the upcoming meetings and what we're going to talk about. That's the easy part. The hard part now is, are we going to depend on outside briefers to come in and give us this briefing on the sewer system or the mine or something like that? Or are we going to take the information we've been gathering and each of us come in with a recommendation? Or are one of us going to take the lead and leave it another separate group to work up a series of recommendations for a different topic area? And then how are we going to keep a track of where we are? Someone needs to hold a paper and pencil together to say, these are what we've discovered, or these are the things we've talked about for the mine. These are what we're talking about for the river. And then over time, we would go in and improve it. But we have to spend a certain amount of time for each subject before we go to the next one. Otherwise, we'll talk about the same subject over and over and over. And so these are a lot of notes to myself about who's recording the data, how do we record it, how do we update it, I'm not locked into any of this. I'm just saying it was my thought process for a weekend trying to figure out how to get to the end game. And it's a lot of work. We need 2 years or 3 years to do the job right rather than 1 year. Thank you.
Well, after the last meeting, I had a lot of thoughts too, and one of the thoughts that I kept coming back to was that not just in these meetings, but in the public meetings before with the city, one of the issues that I've seen as a stumbling block is a failure to reach consensus on the science. I often hear quotes of considering the amount of recharge in an area, or where people are just either accepting, or I'm not pointing any fingers, but there'll be an acceptance of a study and there'll be a group that doesn't accept the study. And I think that if we can't come to consensus on the science here that we're going over, that we're not going to get anywhere with this. I think that, if Baraka came out with a study and he put together facts that are taken out of the Rawl study, that we have to either agree or disagree that the Rawl study is something that we should actually be referencing. And that's where I've found, particularly in the public meetings, so much disagreement of what studies we're looking at. And we're not necessarily going to do a whole lot of new studies, but I think that when these topics come up, that we have to stop for a minute and say, okay, are we in agreement that this is a low recharge area, or that specifically when I was reading the Rawl study, that the recharge does occur within the city's DRGR is already east of the well sites and north of the well field. So that's not even the part that we were looking at specifically. So I don't know how to be more specific, as to say we just need to find some agreement when these topics come up.
Something to that is I had sent to John when we talked about the list of studies that need to be on the website that we can pull up and all that. And I think on that list, we need to recognize which ones were adopted and which ones weren't. And I think there's a big difference there. And so for example, I'll give you an example, because I think the ones that we really should pay attention to are the ones that were adopted, because those are the ones that we work under. Obviously, we know the Bracco study wasn't adopted, but some of the studies that he references were, and some of them weren't. The Rawl study was not. The DeLisi study was not. Those were not adopted studies. They were probably good studies and good stuff and good background. What was adopted, and I think, and this is something, as I go through my task, I'm not going to steal your time here. When I go through, I want to, we know that the 09 stormwater watershed update was adopted by the county and the Water Management District. We've referenced that several times. We also, from last time's presentation, know that there's an adopted Everglades Basin Management Action Plan for the Imperial River. It's into state law. That's that nutrient removal requirement that we're under. It's adopted. With that, the city then adopted in 2010 a stormwater management plan, phase 1, and in 2011 the stormwater management plan, phase 2. This phase 2 implements the adopted nutrient requirements that were in the state law. So we need to recognize that if we should look at any studies, we should first, before we can first get the water right, we first need to look at the studies, in particular the ones that were adopted, because those are the ones that the city operates under, or the district operates under, or the county operates under. And I think those are more important than the other ones that maybe they're good studies, there's good backup, and there's pieces of them that we could pull from. But back to what Tori said, if they're not adopted, they're not really sanctioned by anybody. They're studies, which is good information, but so.
I'd like to make a couple points. I'm glad that Dennis pointed out that the Baracco report was not adopted by the city. So I don't want to hear any more of this, that we need to be referencing all the time the Baracco report, because it was not adopted by city council. It was recommended, urged by the chamber that they adopted, but it was not adopted. Number one. Number two, I agree with a lot of what Dennis is saying. I agree with what David is saying. The thing is, if we're going to provide any meaningful output other than just our own individual opinions, we're going to have some of these independent experts help us out. That was in the resolution that was passed by City Council. At the last meeting, we made a motion which was passed 4-3 that we go ahead and move forward with Kevin Irwin. And even though Nicole may have had some discussion with him before we officially convened and all that stuff, it doesn't make any difference because the Conservancy District knows this area probably better than anybody sitting here at this table. So the fact that they had ideas on what we should do, no problem. I have an idea, and I'm going to bring it either to the next meeting or the meeting after that, which would be a scope of work for someone like a Roger Kopp to perform. Because if we're going to come up with anything of improving the DRGR so it can be developed, we're going to need more than likely locally adopted standards for flood water management design criteria, as well as probably some additional pollution control design criteria. South Florida Water Management agreed that you can do that. So I do think we're going to have to do that. Now, how exactly we do it is yet to be worked out. But the other thing that I think is clearly right, which David alluded to, I did write an email to Audrey, I think it was yesterday, in fact, and I simply said it would be very helpful, not necessarily at this meeting, but at least by the next meeting, if she could give us a work backwards from the moratorium lifts at a certain date. Okay, if you're going to have certain work output, which I think this shows some of that on this, there's a date that what we have to have that done so it can be submitted to City Council for their consideration. They would, if they, let's assume any one of these things they adopted, we want to do this, then those recommendations we've made then would go to city staff and Audrey to put into what I call legalese so that they become ordinances. Then you go through that public hearing process. My intuition is that probably that any meaningful output that we're going to have other than maybe some tweaking, we would have to have to the city or close to being ready to give to John and Carl within 4 months of when the moratorium ends because of the process that has to go forward. And that's no guarantee the City Council would accept it. They may accept it and modify it, which they're known for doing, but so that's my thoughts for whatever they're worth.
I do agree with the need for independent view at this, and I just want you guys to know that I have reached out to the University of Florida through some of the professors that I know up there, and to see if we could get someone from completely outside the entire area, actually, independently to look. And I'm awaiting a response. I just spoke to one of the professors last week.
Well, first of all, David, were you done with your?
I think I've given the highlights.
Okay, 'cause I-
Basically, I think we need a roadmap, we need to identify the stopping points on the
Just
map.
whenever, yeah, I'd like to walk around, but do you have a comment?
Well, I was just going to follow on to what David had said, because in looking at everything that we have to do and how we get this wrapped up into a cohesive whole, seems very difficult within the time frame that we have, which was why this idea of having Kevin Irwin create not another study, but a decision-making tool. His product will be completely neutral. It will not make recommendations, but it will allow, as an end product, the committee, staff, the council to say, if we restore here, conserve here, intensify here, how does that impact the DRGR as a whole? And so that really, I think, can assist us in saying, if we do this, then we have these expectations as an outcome. And that seems to me to be a great foundation for then we look at what sort of stormwater criteria, BMPs, LIDs, those sorts of things should be applied to areas of intensification. But that really creates that neutral decision-making tool so that we can know if we do this, then what's going to happen elsewhere. So that's why I thought that having that as part of the tool in the fall timeframe we look at BMPs and stormwater issues and all those other things until then, and then everything can layer together nicely then at that point. So that's why we toss that out as an idea.
Yeah. No, I had some of that in mind as well. So let me, I've got some maps that I'd like to provide to you all that's, again, based on existing available data, and I think we have, what we don't have on our, I don't even have in mind, we still haven't spent enough time looking at existing studies, and especially the adopted ones, or even the Baraka one, even though it's not adopted any more than Delicia or Rawl was. This map, which I have copies for you, has the 19 crossings from the north branch of the Estero River down to the county line of I-75, and I'll have copies for you, and it also shows the Imperial River Basin, which doesn't fit the overall watershed, but this is what's under the state mandate for nutrient removal, which has been adopted by DEP and EPA, and I'll show you how that works in just a minute with the city study. But basically, those crossings and sizes are on the side, so I have copies. You can do big ones or little ones. The other one that I have copies for you is off of the 2011 Stormwater Master Management Plan for the city. These are the basins that were mapped for the DRGR that are part of the city plan. And you can see this is the Rosemary Canal Basin in this purple. This is the Blackner Creek Basin in red. Those come across 75 in multiple crossings this way. So there's there's 4 sections of land here that come this way, which is basically a couple thousand acres. The mine has its own system. This is burned and pumped. This whole 2-section area is burned and pumped. This flows, some of that flows across near Morton, Terry Street. And then, of course, the Imperial River is the main watershed. The 2 major preserves, the Hidden Cypress Preserve up to the north and the Pine Lake Preserve to the south, are the 2 natural areas in the DRGR that you'll see in that's where I'm going to lead into my recommendations or for the task force. So you have copies of that. The other thing that was discussed last meeting by the district, and I have copies of excerpts of the Everglades West Coast Basin Plan by the DEP, and on that is what was referenced in the link from, I think either Phil Flood or Dan Waters. The little green tab is the page that was referenced for the nutrient removal requirements for the city of Bonita Springs on page 60. I'm sorry. Should be enough of them. Yeah. On page 60, if you look at that tab, the green tab, you'll see highlighted there the city of Bonita Springs. That 26.5% is the requirement of the nutrient removal reduction for the city. The 24% that you see on the bottom is the total basin. So actually, Bonita Springs as a city is required to remove 26.5% of the nutrients from existing conditions, and the total basin is 24%. And then the other thing I want to point out, and this gets back into what you were saying, Fred, is that what I was saying about something like the Baraka report, what's in the Baraka report takes that 26.5% and says we should increase it by 10%. It did not say we should increase it, existing conditions, by 10%. And I want to clear that up because I think that's not a bad recommendation, that we would take the nutrient removal required by state law and increase it by 10% for the DRGR. And the engineers I've talked with said, yeah, we could probably do that. With good management practices, we can achieve that. So you'll see on these 2 pages of the Baraka report, he references the same nutrient removal on page 1 as in the state mandate, which is the 26.5%. Then on page 2, he references that let's take that and increase it by 10%. So he's saying, and I'd say that's probably something we should put in the parking lot and think about that. That's not bad. That'd be 29% nutrient removal versus the 26.5% required by state law. So that's why I say let's don't ignore some of the things in there. That's not bad. And it's so what I had then on my chart, which I put in the picture format, is to first model the DRGR for stormwater quantity. And what we have to do is make sure that what we're doing, whether it's Roger Kopp or anybody else, this was done by a professional engineer. If somebody's going to look at stormwater flows and flowways and flood elevations, they better have a PE license and be certified. And I don't know that Roger Kopp is. So I think you have to look at who the consultant should be, and that's why the consultant selection process is pretty important. So I think it should be an extension of the plans that we already have, that we paid for, and that's part of our master plan for the city. It's included in the city plan, so it should be an extension of that. Water quality needs to be just what we talked about. Let's figure out low-impact development standards. Yes, the city can incorporate additional standards and should to meet the nutrient removal and improve standards out there in the DRGR. So that would be the water quality elements, as well as maybe new filter marshes or water quality projects that would be out in that area. Restoration, I think, there is some potential for restoration. I don't think you're going to restore water levels where we have roads, facilities, berms, pumps. It's really just not going to happen. I think Fred Parton mentioned that. But we can restore things in the natural flowways that are protected, like the Imperial River Basin down at the south. We can restore the Jefferson Flowway. We can restore things up at the hidden Cypress Preserve that was bought by 2020. So there are areas for restoration that can be very meaningful in the DRGR. But it's not the whole DRGR. And then the funding, I think there's another part of that, Baraco, that I was very pleasantly surprised, and that is additional impact fee, a super impact fee that can go toward things like water management criteria, and a drainage district that has funding not only for water quality projects, but even money that will go to crew, additional money for there. So I think there's some good opportunities that we can do, and I think the public water supply, we can have somebody look at, but I think mostly we're going to see that BSU has experts on that there's really no reason to bring in an expert on that. If they need to call their guys in, let's have them do that. But I think that's something that BSU has done well for 43 years. And I would suggest that we don't need to recommend to the city that they go hire a hydrogeologist if BSU's hiring one. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thank you. So we have a couple, and yeah, 1 second here. David, thank you for putting a time perspective in this and your effort on it, and Dennis also, to where we need to get to in such a short period of time and how we're going to get there. And that,
Something in black and white, and then keep evolving it.
yep.
The point I was going to make is that I think if these are halfway meaningful, I think in order to go through that process where the city turns the crank and they have to get a resolution saying they want to move forward with any of these things, and then you have to put it in what I call the legalese, the ordinance format, and it's got to go through the public hearing, these are not quite early enough in completion, I think. They're close.
If we jump the gun
Yeah.
and we don't have the right scope, we're just spinning our wheels and wasting time anyway.
Let
I mean,
me just say this. If we do not have whatever we're going to do to the city where if they choose to adopt some of this stuff, as soon as that moratorium lifts, unless it's extended, there's going to be at least one and maybe two development applications and all that go in requiring rezoning and all that, and then we're going to be right back to that same mess we just went through, where you're going to have one group saying this, another group saying this, and I don't want to see this. I think I'd rather give the city, now if the city council, when they get this stuff, they may turn it down. They may say, what we got's adequate, let's move forward, and that's it. We've done the best we can do.
If you haven't reviewed these, though, you're not going to be able to approve this. You shouldn't be
No.
able to approve the scope if you haven't reviewed
No,
it.
no, I agree that we need to review those, and we can be doing that as some of the other things that we need to do are going wrong. That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's the same frustration that Fred Parton exhibited of waiting on future planning for over 20 years. In fact, it's on 30 years now, then 1984 when they put that out there. And, they can't plan for that area on their part, so they've got to pull it away. So hopefully we can come forward with something here that's tangible and usable and makes sense for everyone involved, at least to give some sort of, I think our job is to give sort of a consensus to the city council of direction they can take. And I think it's stepping towards that direction. And we will get there. as far as the records keeping and stuff, I mean, that's, John, I'm just assuming you, as a matter of fact, I know he does, he keeps a running tab of where we've been with this thing, and so we can not retrace our own steps and keep forward, and obviously offer you to speak up at any time, say, hey, guys, we've touched on this, this is what it was, keep going forward.
And actually, if I could jump in, that's why we included a couple of things after my discussions with the chairman, a couple of things you'll see on the agenda and in the packet that can maybe lend towards this whole discussion as you guys are working through your next steps, and you have two different versions of narrative on next steps and one kind of in graphic form, and I'm sure you'll try to meld those and come up with something you can all live with. But as you're going along that process, I included a list of possible future presentations. And some of those tie directly into some of the things you've already talked about. Some are a little bit further afield. These aren't in any particular order that you'll see, other than the fact that we talked about maybe having Public Works at one of the future ones, having more upcoming ones rather than waiting towards the end. But that's totally up to your group, and we can add to that list, take away from that list, as you see. But I think that for the most part it ties into your discussion that you're having now about your next step. So I kind of envision that the future meetings will be bifurcated in the sense that you'll have a presentation up front for whatever it is that you've told me to try to set up for that time, and then go on to your discussions.
Thanks, John. In coming to there, item number 6 of continuing discussion regarding what resources may be needed. You know, at the next meeting, we have, Kevin is going to do a presentation, and, you know, maybe we should talk about the next one, if we could have staff then, Public Works.
That's the way I kind of had it envisioned, if you're
Right.
okay with that. Are you Kevin at the next one? I'm sorry, my own rule. It will be Kevin at the next one, and then Public Works.
That's a $5
and-
fine.
Right, that's a $5 fine. Public Works at the next March meeting, then talking about NPDES and water quality standards and what we're doing to meet some of those obligations internally, stormwater planning. But again, those are out there for discussion purposes. I do need to remind you, though, that, and you'll see this in the emails in the packet, that with Kevin, he's been very flexible with us. We worked around his schedule, so he's waiting for us, hopefully by the end of this meeting, to boil down the scope of what you'd like him to talk about. We have the original thoughts for the presentation, but I just wanted to make sure that it was in the front of your mind that we do need to finalize that, so he has a chance to kind of prepare for the March 3rd.
I have a question. I was interested to learn at the last meeting from Water Management that they had jurisdiction for large developments, but that individual sites were under the Department of Environmental Protection, correct? And is someone from there going to talk to us about?
That is one of the entities that I've listed on your future
Okay.
presentations
All
if
right.
possible.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anyone else right now that any of us can think of that we want to have here, maybe to do a presentation, in maybe the first week or April? Or do you want to digest a little after we get the next 2 meetings in and kind of develop that? Because we can continue this discussion of what resources may be needed every meeting, because that's going to evolve with this kind of little living, breathing organism we've created here.
I think it depends on, if we're not going to be able to do the tour and get on-site information, well, then we might want some of that brought to us. That would be my point, my discussion.
I would think that maybe having Eric Livingston talk about some of the stormwater, surface water issues might be something good to have, not waiting too late into the process. He's on the list, yeah.
Well, and if you're going to do that, I would like to see us get Roger Kopp down, because he did that 2009 study, and I'm quite confident that the organization he's with have licensed engineers and all that. Otherwise, South Florida Water Management, Lee County, would have never hired him. And he knows more about sheet flow and the flooding of the DRGR and the area surrounding it than anybody else I know of. I'm not saying there may not be other people, but he sure knows his business.
Well, again, I'll follow your lead. You've got about, I think it was, if I remember right, about 13 different entities that we identified that could be available to come talk to you. We had our first two. We know what the next two will be. And then beyond that, I'll follow your lead. Obviously, the more lead time you can give some of these people, the better. And the more definite you can make your scope of their presentations, the better. But that's up to you.
I would just say on, whether it's David's or the list of consultants, it seems that Fred and Nicole and, you're predetermining that these are the consultants that we should use. And I think we need input back from the staff, because if in fact, if I brought this up before, if in fact it is an update of this master plan that really fits what we need, if in fact it is somebody that is saying, I'm consistent with this, or I don't agree with it, we need to know. But I think we need to make sure we're not presupposing these are the consultants we need, because I'm not sure if they're the right consultants. I know they're qualified for different areas of their expertise. There's no question about that. I mean, I've worked with a couple of myself for a lot of years, so I'm not disputing their qualifications. Just, for example, the restoration issue, I just don't, and I'll ask them when we get to it, I don't understand how or why we'd have an ecological restoration consultant when we've had, when really most of this is a surface water improvement area. And I think that consultant probably should be driving the boat, and the ecological supports it. I think it's kind of reverse, at least my mind, but we'll get into that.
All right, well, go ahead.
Well, if you're saying me, do I have a preconceived idea of who would be a good independent consultant? Answer is yes. However, if there's somebody that you all think is better, then you ought to bring them in. But I don't want to have a situation where we're being handed people just, I want to know more about it than just having somebody tell me.
But, I felt the same way when I had never met Kevin before.
And that's
Yeah.
that's understandable.
Yeah.
To clear the record, I don't know Kevin Irwin. I do not know.
I'd never seen him till after the meeting. He walked up and
Well,
introduced
I-
himself to me. I wouldn't known if he'd kicked me in the head.
All right, well, that's,
For about 15 years, and in my experience with being involved in committees, and in my experience with being involved in committees, particularly with Lee County and the Agency on Bay Management and so forth, I've always found him to be the guy for those questions that we're asking him, and felt very comfortable with him. I didn't bother going into all that the other day, but he's very highly regarded and well-known in the area, that's for sure.
All right. Any other discussion on resources right now, or you want to go to another meeting or so? Like I said, this will come every meeting. Should come up every meeting. So if there's someone else that pops in our head we need to have, why, we will.
I'll just add that I think it's very important that we get interaction from staff and the support of staff. I mean, if Matt Feeney is our Public Works Director and he thinks this one is the right and that one's not, well, then we need to know. I mean, plus, I mean, obviously the whole process of the competitive negotiations, we can't intentionally skirt around that. I mean, and I know it takes time, but it is what it is.
yeah, first of all, there is a threshold in the state law where there is not any requirement to advertise, and we would be well under it with anything we're thinking about doing. That's point one. Point two, in the laws for selecting professional services, price is not supposed to be a consideration, it's supposed to be what you consider to be most, if you got into what you call a advertise and you're getting packages and all that.
let me, just for clarification purposes, there are two separate things that we're talking about here when it comes to professionals. One is our list of potential people to come and make presentations, and I don't think that there's any discussion about hiring them to come and do that. At least I haven't heard that. What I'm talking about is inviting people to come and speak to a defined scope that you want them to come and talk to you about. That's different than the issue of hiring a consultant to do a separate either study or report or synopsis or whatever we want to call it. So let's try to keep those two things separate. And Fred, as much as I appreciate your input about the state requirements and everything, I'd be more comfortable if we relied on our city attorney to advise the group as to. I'm just saying that as the particular situations come up, that's who I at least will be referring to get my.
Asked last week. I remember this.
Paul, if I could jump back again to the
Go ahead, Dave.
road ahead. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts about what the output should look like, the scope and volume of it, and how do you want to handle recommendations? Are we all going to shoot and talk about the mine at the same meeting, or the septic system at the same meeting, or floods at the same meeting? How are you envisioning this proceeding?
Well, actually, it was like today, we brought in, actually, our water resource and water reuse and sewer collection, we're going to have one of those guys every time. Our public works guy for the city will give it more of a perspective of what the entire city's requirements are that they have to do, is what I envision as far as the NPDES requirements of maybe of what their projected growth models are, which, I know they work hand in hand with BSU, and kind of what requirements maybe they have and things maybe they're looking for to come out of here, stormwater runoff regulations. We moved into probably about a dozen years ago of having larger developments have monitoring wells where the water comes in and where the water comes out. They have to pay for that constant update and monitoring to see how good the water is, how good their system is of treating water. If we need to have different regulations other than just a 3-day stormwater retention area, maybe we need to have added filtering ponds and things like that. And I think we will get a lot of that out of those folks. And I think that'll help us grow into what we're going with each individual meeting.
I'd like to add that since you brought up the mine, that we asked them to come in, and they're the ones that have filed a comp plan. They can just talk about water issues, but ask them to come in. I mean, they've got professionals on board, and some of them are here. You could ask Citrus Park to come in too, because you've got these different areas that are permitted, burn pumps permitted, and I don't know what you do with somebody else's land. I'm not going to tell them. I don't. Maybe somebody from the city can, but that's pretty tricky to say we're going to tell them what to do with their land on a very specific piece of property. So I don't know.
The other thing that's been coming up, not in here, but is about the Biggert flood insurance and the affordable flood insurance, and whether we have the potential within this area to affect the entire city and the possible difficulties that people are going to have in paying for their flood insurance, and the effect it's going to have on property values and commercial resale of properties because of the consequences. And if people aren't aware of that, maybe somebody could bring us up to date with the changes in those laws, because as I understand them, they're huge, and particularly if you sell your house, then the other person that buys it comes in bang at the top level of costs. So perhaps, we could do something, not get the water right for that too, for the entire city.
Yeah, Tori has really brought up a good point. It was just a year or two ago that they redrew the flood maps for Bonita Springs. And there were a lot of properties that were heretofore not in a required flood insurance area that suddenly are now in that. A little sidebar note, and it doesn't affect the flood insurance, but it speaks to what I'm saying. Your YMCA, which was built and actually got some county money, so it could be a hurricane shelter for this area. It lost its status because when they redrew the flood maps, they said that it would have water in the building. And so it no longer can be used as a hurricane shelter. So what Tori is saying is important. We need to look at two things. One is the cost of the insurance, but more important is the impact of just having that boundary of that flood area redrawn. And usually when they redraw it, don't get smaller, it gets bigger. So.
All right. Down under item number 7 here, next meeting is scheduled for Monday, March the 3rd at 1 o'clock, which Kevin will do a presentation then. Item number 2 there, we have a request to reschedule the 17th. Dave?
I have a conflict along with standing, and I hate to lose money on it. We will be out of country from 9 March through 22nd or 23rd of March, and that's just too big to swallow. If we could delay the meeting, that would be wonderful. If not, so be it.
I believe David did bring it up.
How long are you going to be gone?
2 weeks.
And I mean, what, I don't know what day you're going to be back in.
I think it's 9 through 22 March.
Well, if you want to, you know, I've got no problem moving it to the 24th, which is,
Yeah. 24th?
yeah, that's the 24th. It's the 4th Monday of the month.
Right.
Is everybody get your smartphones out and
Yeah.
check your schedules.
All right.
And I will have to check the availability of
The room.
but I think we're okay.
Okay.
Do you want to also tentatively pencil in some April and May? Do you want to stick to the every other week? Do you?
I have a little conflict in April, so I wouldn't mind if we got looking at that while we're here. Sure. And my conflict is, I'm leaving town the 8th of April and we'll be gone probably 10 days. So that doesn't really leave a second meeting between. The 7th is a Monday? Sure.
My exec tells me 24 is good.
Okay. So is that good with everybody? March the 24th for March? And then in April, the 7th and the 21st? Awesome.
And I will send you out a confirmation as soon as possible about the availability of the room there, just to make sure there aren't any conflicts on that side. I'll send that out sometime.
Thank you, John.
The 3rd, the 24th of March, and the 4th, the April 7th, and 21st.
If I may chime in one more time, please, Mr. Chairman. I gave you three pages worth of ideas for the way ahead. Dennis certainly gave some good ideas. I'm looking for comments or ideas or something so we can keep working and evolving and improving, making things better, and would appreciate anybody's comments.
How about we take, if David would be good enough to provide everybody like the Word document, then any of us, we can edit. I can put my writing in red, and then we can have it at the next meeting, and somebody else can use a different color. John can assign the colors or something.
I'm not sure how many color fonts we have, if everybody's going to be adding their changes in color, but I could suggest that you've got both Dennis's narrative, David's narrative, and Dennis's timeline in graphic form. Why don't you just take a look at it, send me your thoughts individually, again, not to everyone, but send them to me individually, and I'll do my best to, if I can, meld them, and if I can't, at least reproduce them so everybody can see what everybody's thoughts are.
And add in there what you're, you know, for each think kind of what the threshold you want to hit or what goal we want to try to achieve by that time.
Plus, what I had tried to do in the picture was to say there's major topics that we want to hit. Water quantity, quality, some restoration issues, and maybe some water funding that still ties into the, is it feasible? So maybe be thinking along those lines too, and maybe we meld what David had and I had and kind of put it still in an objective format.
That was a bit more detailed, I think, than what you've done. I may have been over my head about understanding what's going on, so I was looking for.
Yeah, but it also, the graph then made it easy to see that a lot of these things will be overlapping as we go. Yeah, that worked, because we can't get it all done if we don't.
And these
Then don't
were-
go out of town. Stay here with us.
These were
Either that or take
really,
us.
these were good first steps on both for Dennis and David, and I'm sure we can get something useful. I've got a couple questions before we close. Are we at that point? Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, one, on Kevin Irwin, the stuff I asked to forward to him, I'm assuming he got it? That I sent you, I guess, yesterday? Okay, sure.
Let's go right down to that, John.
Well, if you want to, before we get to that, if you don't mind, under member items and reports, there was just one item that was included, and that was a request that was made of Nicole to get the information about the park down in Collier. I don't know if the group wants to discuss that or not, or obviously it's there for you to discuss in the future if you want. But
At the last meeting, I think it was maybe David that had asked if some information could be provided as to what is happening on the large parcels in the Lee DRGR. And so this is something that the Conservancy put together, and it doesn't have acreages or number of units being proposed, but it does indicate where there are current mines, where there are proposed mines, proposed residential, and those sorts of things. So it gives you an idea of how the Lee DRGR is broken up. So we can provide a more refined table perhaps in the future, but this at least gives some perspective, and so I wanted to share that with everyone.
Are these existing or are they proposed?
Yeah, there's both, and the color differences show existing or permitted. The blue are have the current local applications in for some sort of conversion. Mine's converted to residential, so the different colors will show kind of where the parcel is at in the process.
Public lands mean there's no water in there.
Correct. Those are held by public entities. Yeah.
Okay, then getting to staff updates, you'll see I have listed 4 items that I just wanted to touch on briefly, and truth be known, I have 3 more. So I'll try to make them each as brief as possible, starting with the ones that are not on your list, but because the developments came since the packet went out, the website. Visit the city website. I've worked with our IT people and our communications people about tailoring the website to specifically address this group and what the group is doing. It's still a work in progress, but you'll see on the front page of the city website the group being referenced, the Citizens Water Strategy Task Force, and then a series of drop-downs. It's already populated with things like the agendas for each of the meetings so far, the full packets for each of the meetings so far, also the handouts, the things that come in after the packets. The minutes, your contact information is public record. What we don't have up there yet, but I think the timeline was by the end of this week to have it populated with links to all of the studies. Now, the reason why that's taking a little bit longer, obviously, is because that's a lot more dense in terms of data, but you should have access then electronically to all of the studies that we've referenced, all the maps that go with that. Please, when you can, take a look at it. Give me whatever suggestions you want to include for, whatever changes we can make. But obviously, we'd like to get this as readily available to the public as possible, and that's one of the ways we can do it.
and this goes to what Dennis said, but I think it would be good that we would, like on the links to these various studies, somehow it ought to be on there, adopted or not adopted, because there's
Well,
going to...
adopted by who, too?
Well, yeah, but adopted, we need to differentiate that, that's on that site that is a report versus one that has been adopted, whether it's by the city or whether by South Florida Water Management, Lee County, or whatever. Good point, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, because the one thing that kind of opened my eyes, on the drainage basins, you know, if you're going to do changes, are you going to move drainage basin lines? Maybe, I mean, but that's pretty big stuff when you've got pipes and downstream flowways designed for those drainage basins. So I'm just saying, we need to know what these studies constitute, especially on the legality part of water.
The second thing I wanted to touch on is, and Tori mentioned it already a little bit, the Biggert Waters Act on its relation to the National Flood Insurance Program and flood insurance premiums in particular. The city has been very involved in this whole process for almost 6 months now, since we became aware of the fact that some of the changes that we thought were going to be taking place in the future were snuck up on us a little bit more quickly than we thought, with much more dramatic results than we originally thought, and that, frankly, that the NFI people originally thought. You may have read that the mayor was actually, along with other local mayors and the Board of County Commissioners, up in Washington last week, where he got trapped in a snowstorm, trying to get the attention of the Congress on this. The House of Representatives has not acted yet. The Senate has, favorably, in the sense that they're going to try to delay some of the impacts. In terms of geographic scope, it's probably a small area of the DRGR that's actually affected by the flood zones, but having said that, within that area, it could be a really significant and substantial impact on those individual property owners. So obviously, it's very high up on our radar. We'll keep you posted on it as it goes in, and it could, in fact, depending on what the Congress does, could tie in to the recommendations that you're going to be needing to make it to the council. We'll keep you posted on that. It's a work in progress.
Can I ask a question, though?
To be clear, a lot of the DRGRs, as you say, not impacted in and of itself, but when we're talking about restoration of flowways and things, would that in fact help provide some level of protection for people who do not live within, like Spring Creek? You know, they don't live in the DRGR, but what if we could do anything out there that would benefit?
And you're absolutely right. That goes to the whole question of the accuracy of the FEMA flood maps and what we can do about changing some of their conclusions by providing better science, by providing changes to the physical layout of the flowway. So it's a long process, but it is one that's very high up on our priority list right now. We'll keep you posted on that. Another thing I wanted to mention to you is that community development at this point is working on a separate process similar to what the county is doing also, by the way. The comp plan with regard to water supply has to be updated on a regular basis. They're in that process right now. We are estimating that a draft of some comp plan language is going to be ready for the council probably March, April-ish, and you will be presented with copies of that draft language so you can weigh in on it and take a look at it and make whatever comments are appropriate at that point. But I just want to let you know that process is going on by community development. With that, we've already touched on the list of possible future presentations, so that's good. We'll kind of keep that as a running topic on your agenda. Plans for the final scope of presentation for Kevin Irwin. Again, Kevin, we've communicated back and forth. He's got his schedule arranged so that he can come down and speak to you. We have a couple of items already identified from your prior discussions, but just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else we're missing. Now, Fred has indicated has provided, and I think I handed out to you some of his ideas, so let's, if you don't mind, try to focus for a minute on what we want to ask Kevin so he has as much time as possible to prepare.
Quick question on the, you said Staff is working on the update element on water supply. Does that include wastewater, any other water issues other than just the public water supply?
I believe so.
Yes, no. Oh, yeah, I know, but I mean, is it any other water issues update that are due, water and wastewater, or just water supply?
I think it's water waste.
Oh, okay.
I have a question. Here Fred addresses, is Kevin going to study what to do with various dikes property owners have built around their properties, which in effect increase the, how do you, how do you think he's going to get that info? I mean, I just ride around there all the time, and I drive around and I hike around, and I don't think there are any available maps of each individual property out there and its topography at this time. That's kind of a broad question.
Yeah, I think he's going to have to do the best he can with it. I mean, obviously, there's some of the dikes are big enough that they clearly show from Google Earth, among other things. Some of them you can see by just making a quick, what do you call it, a windshield tour of the DRGR. I didn't have anything particularly in mind, but if you're going to look at that area, the dikes do have some impact, and there's all kind of possibilities as what might be recommended by different people that work on this. One of them is you leave them as is. Another one might be, no, you actually cut some holes here and there and create some natural flowways within the site and all that. Now, those are people's properties, so you can't just fiddle around with them. And a lot of those dikes have been there for at least 20, 25 years. I believe the ones at the mines may be of that. But there's no way you can look at water out there and not have realized that those dikes do have an impact.
Yeah.
One impact they have is the water that would have gone in there is now not in there, and it's out on somebody else's property, more than likely.
Yeah. The dikes and the pumps were back, they're permitted, they're vested.
Yeah. Didn't say they weren't.
Well, no, I'm just saying, but and this gets into the recommendations of land use. This is why different land use, then you take them down by incentives. You want the density, take the dikes and the pumps out. I'm just saying, those are the types of things that I think that's where the benefit of development does occur.
Well, no, I would
Yeah.
agree with you. If you do develop something, you can have a give and take process between the developer that wants something that you can give him and what the city and the surrounding people want. No, I agree.
Right, that comes to exactly what I was going to address, but I didn't think it was going to fit here, but now it is. And
Yeah.
that is, for example, I have three 5-acre parcels.
Right.
If I decided, or the city decided, that the flowway should go in and around me, I'll say, well, I'll put it through 1 and not through 2 and 3.
Yeah.
That's where originally, when I saw the Baracca study, that I thought, wow, if that development can allow that flowway there, then the individual property owners, and especially after I found out that Southwest Florida Water Management didn't have that say over the individual property owners. I thought there's so many individual properties out there that was one of the big stumbling blocks that I had originally, and one of the pluses towards some of these ideas of increased density in some areas.
And that may be one of the questions that we ask Kevin. What are your ideas on incentivizing for the individual owners to join in this process?
Right.
Whether it's, whether if he thinks they'll see increased land value, whatever it may be. But that's one of the things we can ask Kevin.
And I would agree, and piggybacking on what Tori said, I think if any output of this group says there should be some type of development out there, that one of the areas that we really have to be sensitive to are those small, less than even 5-acre property owners up to the 20 or 30, because and the odds are they've been there. They didn't buy recently after it was called the DRGR. I mean, you were probably there before that was called DRG.
No, just 20 years.
Oh, okay. Whatever.
But you
Okay.
see,
Yeah.
if I'm not interested I'm just using me as an example because I have lots of neighbors like me. I'm not interested in putting more houses on my 15 acres. I've got what I've got. I love it out there. That's why I live there, right? But it still is my option to allow that across my land or not. So what incentive, there has to be an incentive also other than just me putting on 18 more houses, because I was going to put 18 houses on there anyway. So that's where I always saw kind of the fly in the soup, was that I was thinking, well, how's this going to work? Whereas I'm just referencing it because it's the most recent study, the Baraka study was like, wow, this is a possibility.
Yeah, David?
One more time, please. Reading Audrey's memo, or whatever it was the other day, about the sunshine laws and field trips, can we get a list of contacts that we may want to contact individually and tour the area? And secondly, as you know, tomorrow morning there's going to be a discussion about our funding for the Kevin study. I would hope that you can be there to defend it to the council. Thank you.
I'm just going to add to on the tours, if we're not going to do a group tour, and we do it individually on our time, whatever, then maybe key points. I mean, I had the list, but that doesn't mean it's the list, but a list of key stops, you know, maybe a route that's a safe route that you don't get stuck, things like that, and you don't get shot, you know.
Hey, we're not all wild out there.
I have to confess my confusion. Somehow we drifted on to the field trip into the mine. I wasn't hearing if we confirmed the scope of Kevin Irwin's presentation. In the email, I've got the 2 items that you articulated, and they are what is restoration ecology and the possibilities for Bonita Springs, and the second was a background on Lee County's DRGR. Those are the 2 things I heard articulated from the group. Is there anything else? Fred has suggested some stuff. I'm not here. If I'm hearing a consensus, I'll add that, but I just need to hear a consensus
Well,
or
and
not.
I think his general understanding of the way the sheet flow works out there, where the water comes from, where it goes to, you know, how it gets there, how do we make it and I'm just guessing from what I think his field of expertise is, you know, how do we make that a sustainable, decent environment in that area, and how the rest of the city benefits from it. I know that's probably a pretty broad sweeping
Does that sound about right?
But
I will take that verbatim and give it to Kevin. Good. And I'm good. Sorry about jumping you back, but I wanted to make sure I had that right before I jumped off the subject. And now about the field trip. Yes, you all got the memo from the city attorney about her concerns about
What about the hidden cypress and other bush grass? We're not going
it's not up to me, Fred. It's up to the group.
to. Does anybody object to the items I got, that I put in my email?
Well,
One of them was about the dikes and that, and then the other one was about specific discussion.
well, and then you were on Edison Farms.
Edison Farm, only because if that thing gets developed in any way, shape, or form, it is going to have an impact. And he probably would have a pretty good understanding of how it would impact us. I also said, what about hidden cypress? Which I know I was out there a number of times in this, what would you call it, wet spell that we had this summer, and there was lots of water standing on hidden cypress up at the Liberty Youth Ranch and clear down into the BSU property, among other places.
I just have a question, how you're going to ask someone to talk about something that isn't proposed and we don't have, I mean, I've heard several proposals from Edison, whether it was donating, you know, several sections to crew or, you know, building an interstate on-ramp and off-ramp. This is just such a supposition.
Edison doesn't own that anymore. There's a,
Maybe we
Fred-
could,
I'm sorry, wait.
maybe we could have him talk about the connectivity between the Lee and the Bonita DRGR. I mean, I think that would capture those sorts of things, and then if there are specific questions, we can kind of interact with him and, yeah.
And you know, Fred, on the hidden cypress, and I looked at that virtually every week during the wet season, and the problem was that the I-75 crossing was somewhat blocked from poor maintenance. So that water actually was backing up. In fact, it was about the only place backing up, because there was very, very little flow in this Rosemary Canal, and it was backed up through here. You saw this all the way through here. So this is a youth ramp. So this was all backed up because this maintenance really didn't let enough water go through, and it was on the other side of the interstate. It was kind of stagnant.
Right.
So I think it's a maintenance issue
Yeah.
there, but that doesn't mean it can't be restored, as
Oh,
I was
yeah.
mentioning too, with the hydrology.
I just wanted to get Kevin's opinion about these different.
Sure, and that's one of the questions we can ask them.
Okay.
Anything else, John?
Just finally, the memo from Audrey about her concerns on a field trip. She made some certain suggestions about other things you might want to consider, or limitations on how you did it if you did it. So we don't need to decide that now, obviously. You've got a pretty full plate for the next couple of meetings, but let me know your thoughts, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem either going out. I've been out there a lot over the years, and I'm pretty familiar with it. You know, I could go on my own. It's not a foreign place to me, and I know Tori, you're out there all the time, and Dennis, you're out there. Like Cullum, I know you've been out there. You probably know every square foot of it. So, you know, I don't know that there needs to be a group tour out there. You know, but it's difficult to get around some of those places if you're not on a horse or have four-wheel drive.
My suggestion would be, and again, this is given Audrey's very legitimate concerns about how this could work logistically. My suggestion would be, let's put this on hold for now. Obviously, each of you is free to do whatever you want individually. As things progress, if there's a particular issue that you think needs to be illuminated by way of actually going out and looking at a particular thing, maybe we can narrow down the scope of it, make Audrey a little more comfortable on how that could work, and then figure out how to go forward from there. Does that kind of make sense for now? Good. Thank you.
Thank you, John. One other thing that Dennis kind of brought up, if we could have, when Public Works does their presentation, tell us about their drainage maintenance program and the challenges that they are facing.
Let me warn you, they can go on for days about that. I mean, they do take this very seriously and are very dedicated to doing it right, at least from my perspective. I think they'd be more than happy to come and talk to you about that.
You know, and I didn't mean to criticize when I mentioned poor maintenance, because the problem is we've got counties this, DOTs that, cities that, and it's a hodgepodge, and that's the unfortunate part, is that, yeah.
As a matter, I don't want to steal any of their thunder, but we're actually considering a proposal to where we might take additional maintenance obligations from different entities, because frankly, we think we could, let's say, bring more attention to it. How's that?
That's why there was an incorporation vote in 1999. All right, anything else, John? Nope. Anyone else? Fred?
I wanted to ask Nicole a question. Were you contacted at all by city staff regarding all these issues that have come up in the green sheet? I'm going to say what I think about it, and you may not like it, but I think that when city staff is going to question and come up with stuff like they've questioned in that, and not to come back to the majority, anyone of the majority, Nicole would be the logical one, or whoever, and bring up those issues before it hits the daylight, I think that's wrong. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to go into it more than that, but I think that we have enough problems in the task force trying to get our work done. And this could have been dealt with, some of it, I'm sure, by talking to some of the people. Secondly, we could have even had a special meeting if we had to discuss it. So that's my point. Thank you.
And let me just respond, because obviously Fred's making a reference to the green sheet that I helped prepare. I tried, at least to the best that I could, to be very careful that to indicate to council I was not trying to make any comment on either the particular consultant's qualifications or the appropriateness of him coming to work with the group, nor was I trying to make a comment about the need or the appropriateness of further studies or spending money. That's not my concern, frankly. That's your concern as the board. Where I did feel I needed to make my concerns known was strictly as to process. And again, not to, I tried to word it so that I wasn't indicating that I thought the process was illegal or inappropriate, merely that it was different than what staff would normally have done. Are there reasons why you might vary from that? Obviously, yes. Are there situations where, especially if directed by council, we might vary from that process? Yes. But, strictly speaking from a staff perspective, there were deviations from what we would normally do, and I felt it appropriate to point that out to council. What council does with that, frankly, is up to council. We look forward to their direction. Oh, I do want to point out that that was one of 2 green sheets regarding this group. Hopefully you saw the other one too, where I'm asking council to fund your line item so that we can start paying for some of the other things that you are incurring as we go along the way.
Yeah, in 1992, I got called into a meeting at the Lee County Chambers, and Keith Arnold, who was a state representative at the time, the state legislature passed a law that not only do we have to be above reproach, we have to be above the appearance of reproach. And John's not doing his job if he doesn't notify the people he works for, which is the city council, about everything. And I don't think there's any malice at all on his part, as far as that green sheet goes. And I've seen a lot of green sheets.
I'm not indicating there was any malice. I just feel that if a majority of a group votes to do something, and if there's any issues with it, that they at least deserve to be able to be asked the questions about, well, what about this? Someone here might have been able to provide some better explanation than maybe was given if they had been asked. I would imagine that there may have been some of the people in the minority that even raised some of the issues that you've enumerated. I don't know, and I don't care. All I'm saying is I think it's better if there's a majority vote on something. Let's suppose there's 4 people vote to do something I don't care for, and even if staff wants to take my position, I think that the guys that have that majority vote deserve to hear about it before it becomes on the green sheet. That's my point. Thank you.
It's just a procedural point. Thank you, John.
One final thing then, again, this is my practice, so hopefully you'll get used to it. Your next agenda. So far I've got 2 sets of minutes, Irwin's presentation, which I think now has been expanded from the original 2 items, and I'm comfortable with where that's going. We'll also have continuing discussion items on the next steps for the group and a continuing discussion item on resources needed for those next steps. I'm not hearing anything else unless you tell me now.
Just, if any of the members would like a copy of the 2 maps, I've got both small ones and big ones, and you're welcome to take one. Okay.
Which means I need them for the official file too.
Hearing nothing else, we're adjourned.